what gets you excited for you and your investors, would you say, over the next 3 to 6 months pertaining to your company? Hey, everyone. Welcome to our latest TDR Cannabis exclusive. Thanks for checking in. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Listen, we had a big rally last month, and I know stocks have been trading sideways, but there's promise. There's interest here. 2024 looks to be a monumental year for cannabis. So what do we want to do in the meantime? We want to look at specific companies as to who we're watching and why it should be important to you, which is why we welcome in our next guest back to the podcast. He is the CEO of the Cannabist Company Holdings, which trades on Cboe Canada under the ticker symbol CBST, and on the OTC under the ticker symbol CBSTF. Nicholas Vita, good to see you again, sir, and welcome back.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Anthony Varrell, good to see you. How are things?
Good to see you. It's another day in paradise. It's been a nice week so far. We had a big up move followed by a big down move. Everyone's scratching their head, but long term time horizon.
Yeah,
have to have it.
We're all good. We try to educate these viewers, Nicholas, on a 3 to 5 year timeline as far as investing, and a lot of these guys want 3 to 5 minutes, but we're trying to balance it out between the two. But at the end of the day, your stock, as we said before, had a big rally last month. A new benchmark, I think, has been laid. But before we get into as far as what can people anticipate about the business and things that are beyond our control moving forward, I want to backtrack things and get to know your company more specifically as we get to know you more. So you began trading back in 2018, listed on the NEO exchange in 2019. So let's learn a little bit about your background. What made you, I guess, found this business from day one?
So we were founded back in 2012. We're one of the oldest companies in the space. In fact, I think I may be the longest standing CEO in the cannabis industry. It's a little bit of a
11 years.
I'm a survivor. But we were the first company that really thought about creating a diversified portfolio through geographic footprint. And so our first market was actually Washington, D.C., and then we moved into Arizona, from Arizona to Massachusetts, from Massachusetts to Illinois. And so we followed the regulatory calendar, which I wouldn't advise any company ever do. But because each of these markets is effectively an individual country, because of the way the regulations and the laws work, we were able to create kind of very isolated organizations that were able to operate independently. We were always fully integrated. I believed in the merit of being able to control your supply chain, both from a cost and a quality perspective. But that distribution channel was very important to us because it not only allowed us to engage with the communities and the consumer, but it allowed us to capture a lot of data. So as we think about forecasting, we think about the way the markets are evolving, and they are evolving in a very, very interesting way, right? Everyone always thinks about East Coast versus West Coast. It's much more nuanced than that, right? It's Orlando versus Miami. It's New York City versus Rochester. And so understanding those dynamics and understanding the hyper-local aspects of the consumer that you serve really helps you figure out how to position yourself in the wholesale market, how do you position yourself in the retail market. And I think what we're seeing is the maturation of the industry so that, you can start having enterprise level wholesale relationships. You can start leveraging a national footprint, even if you can't go across state lines. And I think that's something that's relatively new to the industry that you're going to see really take hold over the next 24 months.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
Going back to 2012, this was a nascent industry back then, all things considered. And I know that your background was in traditional banking, Wall Street, healthcare. What made you, or what was the main driver of identifying cannabis and then going full bore into it like you did, taking Columbia Care into the Cannabist from back in 2012 to where it is today as a whole?
Well, look, I think, unlike most families, unfortunately, mine has had experience with things like cancer. Okay. And seeing the way cancer and rheumatoid arthritis, seeing the standard of care for palliative purposes worked really bothered me. And so back then it was either medical or it was illicit, right? There was no adult use market. And I frankly was very fascinated by the fact that, I had friends who were in the military who used it for pain management. I had friends, family members who used it for, to deal with some of the side effects of cancer treatments. So there was a very personal sort of a set of experiences there that really drove my viewpoint. I think, setting aside the social issues and the way that the sort of the war on drugs has impacted communities at large, I think really was the icing on the cake. And I've always felt that finding a personal sort of mission and attaching that to your job is the best way for you to kind of become the most kind of the most successful person you can be. what was amazing about that experience is that everyone thought we were crazy. No one, at that point, really, it was
Who
California,
wouldn't?
right? I mean, exactly. It was a great conversation with my parents. But it was really the California market was the kind of the standard, because that was the only one that had this quasi regulatory framework. Our first market was actually Washington, D.C. And I chose DC because when I looked across the landscape of potential markets that were opening up, I found that in the federal budget, there was a line item in the Washington, D.C. allocation that actually paid for the administration of a medical marijuana program. And so Ways and Means, and back then, for those of us who were sort of policy wonks, Paul Ryan was the chairman of Ways and Means back then. And he's a pretty conservative guy from Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
And, my thought was really simple. If I'm going to do this, I really don't want to end up in jail. And so rather than going to a very loosely oriented market, I wanted to go to the most regulated market I could find. I wanted to go to sort of a market where I'm standing in plain sight, unashamed, unafraid. And I had some semblance of understanding of where the federal government was. And because some of the money was coming from the federal government to basically administer the DC program, in my mind, it was unlikely that anyone was going to wake up and sort of find the DEA at their front door, knowing that like their big brother had just paid to start this program. So there was a bit of a hedge involved. There was a bit of I've always really liked administration. I thought it would be very, very disciplined in the way they rolled it out, and it was fully integrated. So we knew what we were supposed to do. We knew how we were supposed to do it, and it was far from perfect. We actually opened up, and there was this very funny rule in DC where you had to, once you were licensed, you had to be open 40 hours a week. Now, we had our dispensaries opened and fully staffed out, but the inspectors didn't show up to our cultivation centers for two months. So for 2 months, we were open every day. We had nothing to sell. And the state and the DC regulators didn't have a process in place to actually register patients. So you can imagine how fun that was.
Sleepless nights.
Yeah, but this is the sort of thing where you kind of live and learn, and I think all of those experiences, whether they were who would have thought, but you learn from those experiences, and I think it helps you make better decisions every time, and that's how we got through it.
Trial and error, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
What a chance that you took, though. But if you have to look back and some of the milestones that you've achieved, like what were some of those early milestones early on where, a lot of your thoughts where you believed where this industry could go. And then once you achieve one of those milestones, what was that when you started to believe more and more as to what you were doing?
Oh, I mean, ironically, our first dispensary that was open was in Arizona. And I remember I would go from literally, I lived in each market as we went and started swinging hammers and planning out and opening up. And I remember sitting in the dispensary, and there was a young woman back then who worked behind the counter, who ended up becoming the facility manager of that location, who now runs is the number 2 person in our IT department. And I looked at her and I said, "Do you think we're ever gonna have like a $10,000 day?" And she said, "I guarantee it." Yeah. And now we're well north of a $500 million business a year. And so, like, do you think about what we've been able to, like, that financial milestone, that operational milestone? It's incredible. Yeah. Being able to hire a team, being able to provide healthcare, being able to operate like a normal company. For me, each one of those things was an enormous point of pride, because we didn't want to sort of wing it. We really wanted people to have upward mobility. We wanted this to be an opportunity for people to grow with the company. And then serve our communities in a way that we would want to be served.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I could, I remember out in Riverhead going through and being grilled by the town of Riverhead and ultimately getting their support to open up. And now it's one of our best dispensaries. I remember
where exactly is Riverhead located?
It's just out by the Hamptons. So it's at the tip of Long Island. And, Long Island is the size of Massachusetts, right? It actually has more people than Massachusetts.
So what kind of demographic when in that area are people going and shopping? What do you find?
We have a lot of medical patients. I mean, still, we're only medical in New York still, but it's a fairly densely populated area. You have people from all walks of life. You have retired law enforcement. You have teachers. You have people who work in construction. You have people who are professionals.
Yeah.
It's everybody. And that's the thing about cannabis that I love. I was sitting in the Manhattan dispensary the other day. 5 people walked in, they had no idea who I was. As they walked out, I just said, "Hey, thanks for coming in." They looked at me and they said, "I love this place." And you had one woman who must have been in her late 70s with her daughter, who was in probably her 50s. She had just gotten her card. Then you had a young man who looked like he'd been come off the set of a movie, with Navy SEALs. The guy was completely jacked, and he had the same reaction. And then you had another person come in who was who was dressed like a typical flamboyant New Yorker, and it couldn't have been nicer. But just like these personalities and these archetypes couldn't have been different.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that the one thing that they all had in common that I could see was that they had a great experience, and they were here. They were coming to us for a reason. And that to me is one of the most unbelievable gifts that we can be a part of.
It's the culture that's building, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
The statement "everybody loves cannabis" holds true.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. I know that it likes to get knocked around sometimes, but I mean, people do thoroughly enjoy cannabis from all walks of life. And I mean, I think that's really why we've been able to get so much momentum in the sector and really get so much will behind it, is because people are actually starting to warm up to the idea of it's culturally relevant and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And it is from people aged 21 to 80 across the entire spectrum.
It's like somebody going out and buy Jordan 1s. It's like this. It's like a lifestyle. It's the culture, right?
Yeah. It's lifestyle. It's definitely lifestyle.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's lifestyle, and it's. I think it's indicative of people who really take interest in their own well-being.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
it's people who are. It's everybody from folks who are interested, who want to take a different track than what standard farmer might want. Who want to take a different track than going out and having too many beers and waking up the next day and being hungover. It's people who are looking at it for creative reasons, for health reasons, for sort of, for 1,000 different reasons. And they come up with answers that are really personalized.
Well, I bring up culture because one of the main reasons why you changed your name from Columbia Care to the Cannabis Company Holdings was about that culture. So two people are on a street and they're talking about your company. What do you want them to envision or think about when they think of that name?
I want them to think about an experience that really spoke to them individually.
Okay.
So I want them to think about a way that I want them to say, you know what, I went to the Cannabist, the people were great, the products were amazing, but they knew exactly what I wanted. So when someone walks in and they feel like they're walking in, for the 50th time, everybody knows their name, everybody knows what they want. And so there's a technology component that ought to be seamless so that there's never any question how best to serve that individual and how to make sure that they come out with a great experience. That to me is the absolute key to our success at the retail setting long term.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in a lot of key markets across the country. And I mean, I know that we were saying that there is very nuanced approaches to branding as it relates to the consumer in Orlando versus the consumer in Long Island. I guess, what are you guys doing from a branding perspective to cater to those nuances that are market to market specific?
Well, I think we bifurcate it into two different categories, right? So there's the storefront brand, and the transition to the Cannabist is incredibly important. And the technologies that we're rolling out to really engage with consumers directly and remotely is something that I think will really set us apart. So people can have that experience and bring it with them wherever they are. The way we've built out those dispensaries is so that we can have a bar, we can have an educational setting, we can have a conversation. You can have the sort of the way in which you select and sort of experience those products individually is very, very, very different than the way I've seen it done in other cannabis settings. But then we've gone up sort of one step further, and we've developed a portfolio of brands, and each product is designed to address a specific area of focus. So, for example, Amber has been uniformly sort of embraced across the country. It's basically live resin, and it's a very differentiated sort of inhalable experience than you get from, say, your traditional vape pen.
Yeah.
Being able to provide something that's high quality, that's safe, that's reliable, but also has some of those details, right? So I think the biggest misnomer is that the maturity of a market isn't necessarily about its age. It's about exposure, right? There are people in Long Island who've been growing their own weed for 50 years, right? That doesn't make there's no difference between that experience set and and California. I think the difference is that in California, people have had enough time with the selection and with the, let's call it the variety of products, so that they can actually walk in and say, I really want something with this type of terpene profile. I really want something, so that THC isn't the only moniker of quality. And that's the thing that we hope to sort of be a change agent for within the market, which is we take the experiences we've had in Colorado, we take the experiences we've had in California, and we change the way people think about what quality really means, so that it has to do with the form factor, it has to do with all of the ancillary, so let's call it components of the flower of each individual strain, as well as the products.
What do you
it's funny
think?
because I actually did that. On Tuesday. I walked into a dispensary and I usually just act dumb because I like to see what the bud tenders have to say.
Smart.
And they're like, this is great. This is like 28%, 30%. I'm like, well, I prefer something like 18% with like a nice terpene profile. That's actually going to cater to what I want. They're like, oh, you actually know what you're talking about? I'm like, yeah. I kind of know a little bit about this stuff, and they were like blown away. They're like, yeah, everyone comes in here. They're like, give me the highest THC stuff you want.
Really?
And I mean, the more sophisticated the consumer gets, they graduate from like a disposable vape cart to like a live rosin cart or a live resin cartridge, and they want those products. But I mean, I've actually become fascinated by seeing the markets mature, because you see the kind of same progression with the consumers. They'll go from disposable vapes, flowers. Then they'll get into like concentrates, live rosin. Concentrates probably not so much, as those are pretty strong products that you really need to be a sophisticated consumer before you actually get in there. But so from your guys' perspective, from a brand portfolio, is there congruency nationwide as far as the brands go in all of the markets, or is there a little bit of fragmentation in different markets that are like market specific brands?
So there's still a little bit of fragmentation, but we've made a great deal of progress in creating that congruency, as you suggested. So
that's got to take time.
Yeah, I mean, and so for example, 777, that is going to be your gold standard flower. Amber is going to be your gold standard inhalable, like press. So we've been rolling out those products, heady, sort of in terms of edibles, but there are complications related to specific markets. So in Florida, everyone has to be called, the brand on the product has to be the same brand on your front door. New York, when you're in a medical market, it takes a long time to get certain approvals. And so, we're doing it as quickly as we can. And I think it's going to be a competitive advantage long term. But at the same time, we're also converting all the Columbia Care stores into Cannabists. And so we have
like that name.
It's awesome. It's really cool because you know what? It's exactly what we are. Right? We're unashamed. We're unapologetic. And, and when people want expertise and they want people who, Anthony, to your point, when you walk in, like, I love it when customers kind of send me emails, and I get a lot of them. I just got one last night from somebody who said, you guys should be doing better at X, Y, and Z. And he was right. And so like that process of getting better and learning happens all the time. But if we know what we want to be, if we know what Due North looks like, then we can always reorient people towards that goal. And that's what the Cannabist is supposed to stand for.
When we look at brands, quality, that was all about quantity versus quality in the early days. And we're now talking about West Coast brands to East Coast brands. But then from what we're learning from you, somebody in Fort Lauderdale might like something more specifically in that market versus, say, somebody in Orlando. So it's becoming in more and more. And this is all based on data, feedback. Like on average, when you have consumers come in to your dispensaries, like, do you have an idea as to how many questions they ask before they actually purchase a product?
It varies. We have people who come in and they don't want to have a conversation. They just go right to the express line. We have people who come in and spend an hour. And then they'll come back and spend another hour.
Well, as the industry grows, that's the kind of customer that you need to cater to. So what do you think?
I've always said bud tenders are arguably the most important person in that dispensary. They're your first line of defense, and they're educating that consumer on what to buy.
Good point.
It's what everyone remembers.
100%. Right? Yeah. So you go from fingers crossed, can we do $10,000 a month? Now a $500 million Northeast juggernaut. What gets you excited for you and your investors, would you say, over the next 3 to 6 months pertaining to your company?
Well, I think there are four things. The first is that the underlying markets that we're in are very, very attractive, right? Virginia's a beast. New Jersey's a beast. New York is all upside. Ohio's converting, Delaware's converting, Pennsylvania's going to convert. I mean, all the markets that you want to be in, we're in. And so that's really important from a growth perspective. The second thing is we have a business that has completed its CapEx curve. So I've already built out all of the capacity I need in manufacturing and cultivation to take advantage of the market growth we're seeing in those markets. And so there's about 500 basis points of gross margin I expect us to recapture over the next 12 months, 18 months, just based on the fact that the markets are growing. And we've already paid for that sort of, let's call it, expansion opportunity. The next thing is, obviously the way in which we roll out our technology platform, along with the cannabis and along with the standardization of our products, is going to be massive. And so the way we engage with our consumers, the way we kind of build that brand equity, and then the way we translate that into our wholesale business. Because remember, we had this very interesting long-term relationship, related to the merger that we just announced would be going forward at the end of July. And the fact is, we didn't really have a wholesale market because we couldn't, because we were being marketed as basically part of another organization. And so as I think about the way we recapture our wholesale business, and it used to be north of 20%, now it's sort of around 12%.
Okay.
We have more doors outside of Florida and Illinois than almost anybody else. And so, like, most of our competitors are really focused in Florida, which is a great market, but it's fully integrated. So there's really no wholesale market. And Illinois is sort of the market where a lot of our biggest competitors cut their teeth to begin with. But who's focused on
these growth states?
On the East Coast states, who's focused in Colorado? Colorado is a $2 billion market practically, and no one's paying attention to it. So the way we can begin,
everything that's old is new again, right?
That's right. And so, it's one of those things where there was always going to be a point in time when everyone said, focus in one market is really important. Having scale in that market is important. And now everyone's realizing you need scale nationally. You need to be able to compete on a national basis to create a national organization. And I think that's where you create the most strategic value. So we've got a clear road path, or sort of road ahead of us on terms of margin improvements. Remember, we just completed a restructuring and took $38 million of costs out of the business net. We just announced a restructuring of our debt. That's going to be very effective at driving cash flow. And all of this really inures to our shareholders. And so at exactly the right time, right? I mean, if you think about it, we got very lucky because we announced the first phase of the restructuring of our debt. The letter came out from HHS that they're going to reschedule. And then I think the next day we announced the cannabis. So all of these things are happening.
Timing. That was great timing.
I wish I could take credit for it. I'll take credit for it in public, but I'll tell you, it's better to be lucky than smart sometimes. So we've done
the honesty.
Yeah, every bit of success I've had is because of the team. But the fact is that we've been very fortunate that things have worked out the way they have, and I think that the federal government's finding playing ball. So you're going to see capital come in. I know that you just had a podcast with one of our partners in the industry that just listed on the CEO Canada. We're on the CEO Canada too, and the reason for that is because CEO is one of the largest exchanges in the world, based in Chicago. So we're already on the senior exchanges. We're already a US SEC filer. We're a US GAAP sort of reporting entity. We're ready to go to become part of the traditional sort of US financial system and global capital market system. And now what we need to do is just execute on these opportunities that are literally sitting right in front of us. So I'm actually very, very excited.
Another example of timing, right?
Yep.
Because do
you see yourself getting? Or go ahead, Chad.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you see yourself getting to $1 billion annualized run rate organically with the current footprint that you have, with that extra capacity coming online, with the infrastructure that you've already built out?
So I'm going to say something that it's not a forecast, and it's not been built by my board. So I don't want to. But if you look at the market opportunity ahead of us in New York, New Jersey, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, there's no reason why we can't get there. And I guess what I'm saying is I think we can get there with what we have, meaning I don't need to change the business in order to, and I think that's the question. You're like, because what that means is that you've kind of once you've hit that stride in terms of scale and potential sort of productive capacity. And frankly, once we've built out the right enterprise level partnerships across the country with other operators in the space, I think that this all of a sudden goes from being kind of still a little bit on the fringe to being everybody's darling. And I think that the resumption of capital interest really changes dramatically once the federal government makes its final determination on rescheduling.
That's pretty much been my investment thesis as far as identifying companies with tailwinds in adult use conversion markets.
Yep.
And you guys happen to check the boxes off on all of them. that are front and center right now with Ohio, PA, New York, Florida. Hopefully November 8th is a positive catalyst for everybody.
Yeah.
With the adult use ballot initiative going through the Supreme Court.
Early in-person voting going on in Ohio as well. And that approval rating within that state, what is that, a $1.5 to $2 billion market?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a big market. And it's a highly regulated market. You know, the Ohio government takes it seriously. So, you know, I think one of the things we've seen is that a couple of the East Coast states have really had a tough time figuring out where they want to be on the regulatory sort of scheme. And even the markets where you haven't seen as much enforcement that you probably should have, everyone's beginning to realize that, you know, these are tough economic times. You have to find ways to grow your revenue base, and you can't tax people to death. So this is an absolute no-brainer for these states and municipalities to take advantage.
Hence, this.
Do you think we'll see some sort of excise tax on the back of 280 dropping, if and when Schedule 3 or SAFE eliminates that or alleviates that?
Maybe. And I say maybe because I don't think that there's a world where the federal government ever takes away the ability of the states to regulate its own programs. I think the train has left the station in that.
Agreed.
And so it's not, you know, what happens with cross-border sort of interstate commerce, I just don't know. But in terms of the way the administration of these programs works, I think the states have a pretty good toehold. And by the way, that's being driven by the governors on both sides of the aisle, all the political spectrum. It's being driven by the legislatures. And, you know, I mean, think about it. Like, I think there's, in the last election cycle, 6 Republicans, since 6 clearly red states had cannabis programs.
Yeah.
So protecting those programs and making sure that they reflect the priorities of the local constituents, because this is a local industry, this is a local business, I think really does matter.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, people say that interstate commerce is coming, and I'm like, well, there's still dry counties in the United States when it comes to alcohol. There's still plenty of provisions on a municipal level that mandate how alcohol is regulated in those jurisdictions. Cannabis is probably going to be exactly the same.
I'll take a page out of your book, Anthony. Let's focus on incremental steps versus comprehensive.
Yeah,
I like that.
Get the rescheduling, because I think it's going to be good. But I was going to bring up, like, you know, as far as changing through times, like, what advantages do you think you have from being one of the original, like, you know, people in this industry back in 2012? But I just think it takes time and experience to understand what works and what doesn't, which is why, based on trial and error, you need to adjust in order to grow, right?
No, that's right. I mean, look, I would say incrementalism, and I've been saying this on all of our earnings calls, I'm not looking for any home runs. Look, this company succeeds by hitting singles every single time and making sure we don't make any foot faults. Right. Very rarely in business do you actually get to look at a market that's growing organically the way cannabis is growing. And all you have to do is make sure you don't make sort of irresponsible decisions with capital.
Yeah.
And so for us, you know, the incremental gains that we're pushing for doesn't mean we won't keep our eye open for home runs. But I don't think we need to get there to hit the type of financial performance that really sets us apart and really sets this industry apart from a lot of other industries. Biggest
challenge in life, I think, for a lot of people, being consistent and disciplined.
Yep.
Easier said than done. Last thing I'm going to leave off.
We've seen a lack of discipline in the cannabis space. I'm not going to name names, but we have seen it in Canada and in the US.
Yeah.
Last thing, I was at SIBO this weekend. I wanted to bring this up to you, Nicholas. And I think this is the significance, is what you said about being listed on the NEO that's now SIBO. But I learned this week that 17% market share for the global equity market, that's the market share that New York Stock Exchange has. NASDAQ has 16%. And SIBO, who operates in 26 markets, has 15%. So like we said, timing's everything. And if you've got yourself a 3-4 month runway time if and when we do get rescheduling, we saw a prime example as to how these stocks rip based on a little bit of news. I can't imagine what rescheduling would do, knowing what happened last month, right?
Oh, I mean, listen, look, we've made our decision a long time ago. We were the first ones to list on a senior exchange industry. And it was our view. And by the way, we're also the first ones to be included on MSCI index. So what that does is it opens a door for real conversations with not only active capital sort of strategies, but also passive capital strategies. And what people don't realize is the amount of velocity and the amount of capital that actually comes every month out of 401ks that goes right into the market because people are benchmarking. So if you're telling me that SIBO Canada, which is a subsidiary of SIBO, is considering, consolidating the opportunity into the U.S. capital markets, well, that's wonderful. And I'm not saying that's the case, but I think it's a much shorter road to hoe than trying to get an unaffiliated market over the hump
For sure,
based on changes on a regulatory framework.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would love to see all the exchanges open up for cannabis. For me, I think that, we wanted to be senior. We wanted to have an affiliation with a sort of an entity that understands the global capital markets. And that's why we made our bet. And I think others are also joining us, which is a great sign.
Agreed. That's why it feels different this time.
Yeah.
This has been great. Got to know a little bit more about you, just with regards to your background, how you founded this company, how you went from, like I said, can we please get $10,000 a month to a $500 million juggernaut in the Northeast region, just the whole journey itself. And then most importantly, let's find out moving forward, what can people look forward to? And not to mention with the rescheduling, you've got a great business model in key markets. But listen, this has been a great conversation. Anthony, I'm sure you like this too.
Yeah, this has been great.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate the time. And as usual, please keep in touch and let's keep the conversation going.
Will do. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So what'd you all think of the interview? Did you like what we recorded with our guests? Then leave a comment below and let us know what you thought of it. And if there's any more questions you want us to ask, as usual, share this video with your network. Click on that bell for all notifications. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.